Let's talk about the good things, and we'll start with the CHIPS Act. So let's go ahead and put this up there on the screen. Yesterday, the Senate passed the CHIPS Act, providing grants and other incentives to the U.S. computer chip industry to better compete with China in science and technology. It is now heading to the House for final approval. Now, this is kind of a landmark piece of legislation. We're talking here about $58 billion with a B being pumped directly into semiconductor chip manufacturing. However, it has split the U.S. politics in some interesting ways. It was a 64-33 vote, but not all Democrats actually did vote for the bill. Let's put this up there. So the Republicans who voted for it are Roy Blunt, Richard Burr, Mark Capito, Cassidy, Collins, Cornyn, Daines, Graham, Haggerty, McConnell, Moran, Portman, Romney, Sass, Tillis, Wicker, and Young. Now, in terms of the Democrats or independents who voted against the bill, actually Senator Bernie Sanders, and then those who did not vote were Patrick Leahy, Joe Manchin, and Lisa Murkowski. So the reasons behind all of this are kind of fascinating. Let's put this up there on the screen first, which is, what is this thing? Well, as I said, it is $58 billion, which is being sent directly to semiconductor manufacturing specifically, but it includes hundreds of billions of dollars more for National Science Foundation grants, which are able to be used specifically for investing in research behind cutting-edge R&D as to the development of both AI, quantum computing, wireless communications, precision agriculture, and more. So it's a major grant towards funding institutions. Now, before we play Sanders's objection, I actually found it interesting. So I reached out to some of my friends who were in the Senate, and I was like, hey, why did Marco Rubio and Tom Cotton, people who were very pro-CHIPS Act, vote against this bill? Yeah. Here's the reasoning that I got, which is that the current bill actually gives an incredible amount of discretion to the Commerce Department. And part of the problem is that with that $58 billion, you don't just grant it to these companies, right? It's not in the legislation. You give power to the Commerce Department, who gets to use definitions and guidance to determine who's going to get it or not. And not only just who, but what projects. And part of the fear was that there was not stringent enough stuff written into the bill that would say that Intel or whomever might say, hey, we need you to subsidize this while also being able to boost production in China. So their objection to the bill is that there was not enough guardrails on the legislation to make sure that the legislation would not be gamed by the computer chip industry in order to make sure that they still have production in China and not. But let's, go ahead.
Before we get to Senator Sanders' objections, because they echo that in certain ways. I mean, his concerns are more on the front of unionization. I mean, there are very few sort of requirements put on these companies who are going to be beneficiaries of a massive subsidy. So we've seen before, you know, these big corporate subsidies going to like Foxconn in Wisconsin, and it turns out to be a total boondoggle that's a disaster for taxpayers and no jobs ultimately materialize. So I think there are legitimate concerns here about whether we could be snookered again. And ultimately, you know, you think you're going to get this chips manufacturing facility, have this good bedrock piece of industrial policy, which is incredibly important. And then ultimately the whole thing falls apart and is just another big corporate giveaway. I do think that those fears are really justified. However, a little bit of context on this, which we've covered and you've covered in particular on this show extensively, but I just want to remind people of. Why this matters so much is because something like 786 chips manufacturing facilities have gone overseas in the past several decades. And it has left us with almost no domestic manufacturing capability. This is really critical. It's critical for you as a consumer. This is in all your electronics. This is in a lot of the new cars, especially the new electric cars, really dependent on this technology. It's also really critical for defense. And this is why part of why Republicans are so interested in it is because you have to have these chips to be able to manufacture the advanced weaponry that we depend on. So the fact that this is overwhelmingly, I mean, actually the advanced chips are overwhelmingly being manufactured in Taiwan.
Yes, correct.
Not a good situation whatsoever, and something that people on both sides of the aisle have been interested in dealing with. So The big question is whether this act has been crafted well enough to actually accomplish the goal, or whether you're going to end up with corporations getting paid and no jobs being created and no new innate domestic capacity. So that's kind of the backstory.
Extremely well said. And as you said, we know we already live in a massive, already we have huge blows to the U.S. economy, hundreds of billions of dollars in lost economic growth from the chip shortage of the last 2 years alone. Let's play Senator Sanders' objection. I'll give you my thoughts on the other side.
Madam President, I do not argue with anyone who makes the point that there is a global shortage in microchips and semiconductors, which is making it harder for manufacturers to produce the cars, the cell phones, the household appliances, and the electronic equipment that we need. This shortage is, in fact, costing American workers good-paying jobs and raising prices for families. And that is why I personally strongly support the need to expand U.S. microchip production. But the question that we should be asking is this: should American taxpayers provide the microchip industry with a blank check of over $76 billion at the same exact time when semiconductor companies are making tens of billions of dollars in profits and paying their CEOs exorbitant compensation packages? That really is one of the questions that we should be asking, and I think the answer to that is a resounding no. This is an enormously profitable industry.
So here's my objection to what Sanders is saying. And look, I'm not saying I enjoy corporate welfare, but we live in a free market capitalist country. You cannot force companies to manufacture here. Now, there are enough stringent restrictions in the bill, which is the most objectionable one to me would be if you could buy back your own stock. You cannot use any of this money to buy back your own stock. So I'm like, okay. Second, it is earmarked specifically towards chip manufacturing. I also want to get to the point that he's making there. He is not wrong that they are more profitable than ever. Do you know why they became profitable? Because here's the issue. We design all of the world's best semiconductors right here in the United States, Intel and others. However, we manufacture them in Taiwan and in Asia. The reason to do so is because that was the way that chip manufacturers were able to boost profits. So in order to actually reduce profitability, or at least incentivize them to go in the right direction, we are directly using this act to subsidize production. And the production is what matters more than anything. Both from a geostrategic point of view, I mean, look, this is part of the reason why if China invaded Taiwan, the U.S. economy, I'm not kidding, would shut down within like 6 months.
Yeah.
Like the U.S. consumer electronic, gone. I mean, no more phone, no more televisions. Like, everything that we use is over. And that is a bad situation. You shouldn't have a single choke point that exists like that. That's why I support this legislation. I hear the concerns of Sanders, of my, other like-minded friends who work in the offices. But listen, we have got to get out ahead of this. It takes 10 years in order to build some of these chip fabs and other manufacturing facilities. We need the jobs. Already Intel is building. They've been waiting for this piece of legislation to pass. We need them in Ohio. We need them in Arizona. We need them in Texas, all across the country. Other chip manufacturers are already saying they're going to invest increasingly $20 to $100 billion here in the United States. We need this money. We just simply do. We cannot exist. So listen, is it baked full of some stuff that I'm not going to like? And are some of these companies always going to do the best thing? Absolutely not. However, this thing got to 64 votes in the U.S. Senate. Hopefully, from what we see right now, it is going to pass in the House.
So
and to that,
a little
take
more
the
in doubt, and we'll get to that in a minute.
That's right.
Yeah, it's a loop. Well, let me just say, I don't think that Senator Sanders is really wrong about anything that he's saying here. I think his concerns are entirely legitimate and justified. Right. And the reality is, and this does suck, like, Intel is basically blackmailing the U.S. government because they were going to create this production facility in Columbus, Ohio, and then they were like, don't know if we're going to. You're going to have to bribe us to do it. And that's the reality of the situation. And that does totally suck. And by the way, Bernie offered an amendment here, which should have been included and of course was voted down, but is entirely reasonable, which says that if microchip companies get this taxpayer assistance, they shouldn't be able to outsource American jobs overseas. Good addition. Repeal existing collective bargaining agreements and must remain neutral in any union organizing effort. That should have been added. It wasn't. So the bill is worse for not having provisions like that in place to make sure that you actually end up with these jobs and with this production, and that it is being done by union workers. However, when you look at it on balance and you say, okay, but this is the reality we live in, and yes, you are going to have to, in order to get this through, you're going to have Republicans on board. It is 100% the case that the things that get through the Senate are things that corporate America likes. There is no doubt about that. Senator Sanders' point on that is well taken as well. He goes on to say, like, okay, you know, what's the reason why we get the corporate subsidies through but not, say, universal health care?
He's not wrong.
He's not wrong about any of that. But when you take the reality as it exists on balance, if I was in the Senate, would I vote for this bill? I would, because it's industrial policy. That's something that has been sort of like off the table for a lot of years.
Yeah, let's normalize
something I believe in. I wish it was done a little bit better than this, which is, it does have some elements of basically like a corporate giveaway. But this is a really critical piece of bringing a critical supply line back to our shores and hopefully creating some good-paying American jobs manufacturing these advanced chips, which is critical for, again, consumer products, electric cars, advanced weaponry, all of the above. So even though I think the objections are well-founded, I can't really disagree with anything that Bernie is saying here. If this is the only bill that I have a chance to vote for, I would probably vote in favor of it.
And that's why I take the concerns of the people who say it's too much power in the hands of commerce. I take the concerns of that, but I do get annoyed when I see like Robert Reich and all those people like corporate welfare. I'm like, what are you, a Cato libertarian now? I mean, listen, like sometimes corporate welfare is good if it's good for the people who are workers, as we all found. It's like the airline bailout. I wasn't opposed to bailing out the airlines as long as you do it right. Now, it wasn't done properly, and I think that is certainly an issue, and we should use that as a track record. But is that the reason to never bail out the airlines again? No, we need air travel. So it's the same thing when it comes to the chips. I don't think it's going to be perfect. It certainly is not. And there's some interesting legislative maneuvers we'll talk about in the Joe Manchin block, which are kind of interesting as to how all of this was kind of used to hoodwink Republicans. But on its face, we should celebrate when people do things which are good for the country. Sometimes, yes, that aligns with corporate interests, and I'm generally okay with that.
Yeah, we got to keep an eye on it and make sure we hold them accountable.
Oh, by the way, if there's cheating,
taking the money and running and never creating anything.
If there's cheating, who do you think will be the very first people who talk about it? It will be right here on this show, and I can promise you that.
Cable news is ripping us apart, dividing the country, making it impossible to function as a society, and making it impossible to know just what is true and what is false. But the good news is they are failing and they know it.
That is why we're building something new, a new mainstream, a healthier one, something more trustworthy, something that we are going to need in one of the most pivotal times in American history. We are building up here for the midterms, for the upcoming presidential election, but we need your help. So if you can help us out by becoming a premium member today at breakingpoints.com, we're trying to change America for the better and the entire world.
So what are you waiting for, guys? Go to breakingpoints.com and sign up and help us build a new mainstream.